I always thought I'd seen it all, but you know what? I was dead wrong. I heard the deep, grinding roar of heavy U.S. Army heavy expanded mobility tactical trucks as they passed through the main gate of Fort Irwin in the Mojave Desert, California. The dry, bone-shaking wind kicked up a dust cloud thick enough to choke on, carrying the smell of dried sweat and grit from years of hard-ass training runs. The brutal July sun, weighing down like a massive gold ingot, baked the vast firing range without mercy. When the transport's back ramp dropped, a lone female officer stepped out onto the scorched ground. The only sound in that morning gloom was the crunch of her combat boots on the crushed concrete. First Lieutenant Ashley Riley, or just Ash to those who mattered, adjusted her duffel bag and took a hard, quick look around the motor pool. Her eyes were those of someone who had definitely been to way worse hellholes than this one. The whole place felt severe, unforgiving, and exactly as strict as its reputation suggested. Every single step she took toward the command headquarters building was like crushing the quiet right out of the air. Up ahead, I could see platoons wrapping up their morning drills. The men were falling into formation with machine-like precision. One by one, their stares started to lock onto her. It wasn't just her sharp walk that caught their attention. It was the simple, undeniable fact that she was here at all. She was the only woman in the entire 4th Special Operations Training Company. This unit was made up of the best, 210 granite tough guys. Ash kept walking, unfazed. She wasn't expecting a welcome party. She didn't come here to play nice. This was a direct order, and it was a slot she'd earned through pure, bloody sacrifice. Even so, as she passed, a low rumble of chatter spread like wildfire. That the new diversity hire? Look at her. The new big-shot officer. Give her 2 weeks, tops, before she quits. The whispers, laced with bitterness, were thrown out just loud enough to be heard. A few guys seemed genuinely impressed by her iron confidence, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. But the vast majority just gave her the side eye, a look of total disgust or confusion, like they were watching a freak show. An unspoken question hung heavy in the dry air: what the hell is a woman doing here? Inside the command headquarters building, Riley stood at attention. She felt the air snap tight the second the unit's senior enlisted man walked into the room. It was Master Sergeant Paul Major Ryan. He was a 45-year-old walking piece of history, his face weathered by 1,000 combat tours. The rows of campaign ribbons pinned to his chest told the story of every meat grinder he'd survived. His posture was rigid, his voice ice-cold, and every move was calculated. 27 years of being a non-commissioned officer just radiated off him. Ryan glanced at her file for a split second before lifting his eyes. "Your First Lieutenant Ashley Riley?" His voice was flat and empty, like the California desert floor. "Yes, Master Sergeant." Ryan's gaze raked over her face, hunting for some sign of weakness. When he found no hint of fear, his expression hardened even more. "This is a direct order from upstairs. I assume you know what kind of environment this is. This is not basic training." "I understand completely, Master Sergeant." "Good." Ryan slapped the file shut. "You'll be assigned to 2nd Platoon. We will evaluate your suitability for a long-duration overseas assignment in 31 days. That's all." Dismissed. There was no handshake, no welcoming word. Just a silent message burning in his eyes that stabbed into Riley's chest: "I never asked for you." Ash had put up with worse than this 100 times. She gave him a sharp salute, turned on her heel, and left the room as quietly as she came in. Silence echoed behind her. The next morning, the base started stirring at 0530, 5:30. The sound of dozens of boots hitting the gravel and the loud, earth-shaking shouts of the drill instructors filled the air. Ash fell in line for the mandatory 5-mile run. She kept her spot in the middle, observing the guys around her. After 3 miles, half the squad was already struggling to keep pace, hacking up dust. At the 4-mile marker, Ash steadily started moving up the ranks. Her breathing was even, her stride economical. When she finished the run, she had passed over 3/4 of the company without breaking a sweat. First Sergeant James Sarge Cullen, the senior enlisted man in charge of the field ops, took notice. With his arms crossed and his crew-cut head lowered, he glared at Ash. "Trying to show off, Riley?" The question carried a clear threat. "No, First Sergeant. Just maintaining my standard pace," she replied, her voice flat. Sarge stared at her for a long moment, then snorted and turned away. But the seed had been planted. She wasn't who they thought she was. And then, on the morning of the 5th day, during the first official formation, it happened. Ryan looked out over the 210 men, and his gaze locked onto Ash like a laser beam. "First Lieutenant Ashley Riley." She stepped forward without a single, wasted movement. The eyes of every man in the company bored into her. Everyone held their breath, wondering what the hell was about to happen. Master Sergeant Paul Major Ryan stepped down off the stage and stood right in front of her. His voice was raw, laced with pure spite. "I'm gonna figure out right here and now if you're actually fit to be in this unit. Strip off your uniform in front of all 210 men." Time just stopped. Even the sound of the wind was sucked out of my ears. This wasn't training. It wasn't a drill. It was an order fueled by pure, unadulterated malice, a public execution designed only to humiliate. A dry gust of wind swirled over the parade deck where everything was frozen. 210 pairs of eyes drilled into her like needles. Ryan's cold command hung over First Lieutenant Riley with the weight of absolute power. It was humiliation, all right, but her posture never wavered. She jammed the burning rage deep down with a will of steel and stared straight back into Ryan's eyes. Her gaze had a quiet force that, for a split second, seemed to flip the roles of commander and commanded. After a long, silent stare down, it was Ryan who finally looked away. He let out a harsh hiss through his teeth. "That's enough for today, but you damn well remember this, my word is law here," he spat out before turning his back. The storm had passed, for now. But what it left behind was an invisible wall that felt even hotter and colder than before. Starting that day, the training ramped up to an insane level, almost designed to break her. At the shooting range, she kept punching hole after hole in the center of the target, the air thick with gunpowder. Her shoulder barely flinched with each shot. The whole sequence, breathing, aiming, firing, was precise, like a perfect machine. The guy shooting next to her glanced at her target, then his own, and just shook his head in disbelief. It wasn't luck. It was the kind of skill you can only get from thousands of hours of endless practice. Next up was weapon disassembly and reassembly. First Sergeant Cullen's barked command got the men's hands flying. The clang of metal parts filled the air, but Ash's fingers moved like a conductor's baton, fluidly, yet without a single wasted motion, as she stripped down the assault rifle. The smell of gun oil burned her nostrils. She finished the disassembly faster than anyone and smoothly moved right into putting it back together. Her speed beat even Sarge, the instructor. "Hey, enough with the hot dogging." Sarge's voice cracked with irritation. Riley didn't even look up. As she snapped the final piece into place, she spoke quietly. "I'm not showing off, First Sergeant. I'm just executing my duties." A few guys nearby let out nervous snickers. Sarge's tight jaw muscle twitched with anger. Ash's clear competence wasn't earning her respect, it was simply fuel for jealousy and resentment. When she flipped a huge male soldier easily onto his back in hand-to-hand combat, they grumbled that a broad shouldn't hit so hard. When she gave the most precise analysis in a tactics class, the guys cracked, "That's what you get for spending too much time in college." She was always alone. In the loud mess hall, where the guys, covered in sweat and mud, were slapping backs and telling bad jokes, Ash always sat by herself by the window. Nobody went near her table. It was like the air around her was a different temperature. A streak of sunlight stretched her solitary shadow long across the floor. That night, Ash was in her bare-bones barracks room. A steel bunk, a small desk, an old locker. The walls were peeling with faded paint. She quietly unpacked her gear, a few uniforms, her perfectly polished boots, and a single, battered book with a worn cover. Tucked inside was one treasured, creased photograph. The sepia-toned picture showed a tall man in a crisp uniform standing next to a younger version of Ash. A single silver star, the rank of brigadier general, shone proudly on the man's shoulder. His face held the same kind of unflinching determination that Ash carried now. That photo's corner was bent, a scar from traveling with her through countless assignments. Beneath the cuff of her right bicep, a hidden tattoo felt like it was starting to glow faintly. It wasn't physical pain. It was the ache of memory, duty, and a soul-deep connection to her family. No one could ever see it. Not here. She placed the picture on the desk and lay down on the bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling. Her father had told her, true strength is the power to endure loneliness. Never had those words felt so real. Am I strong enough? Am I even close to the man my father was? The invisible wall grew hotter and higher the better she performed. It felt like it was telling her that the real obstacle wasn't the training in front of her, but the minds of the 210 men surrounding her. The pain under her cuff sharpened again. This pain is the reason I'm here. It's the proof of my real fight, the one I can't share with anyone yet. No one on this base knew what that meant. She closed her eyes, holding the secret close. It was Friday at 1700, 5 o'clock. The men were wiping off sweat, their minds already focused on the weekend outside the perimeter, the most relaxed time of the week. The sudden scream of the base-wide siren tore through the quiet. Attention all units. Effective 1,730 hours, First Sergeant Ryan will conduct a special, unscheduled drill on the main training field. All personnel report immediately in full combat gear. Do not delay. The announcement shook the dry air, sending a wave of panic through the troops. What the hell? Now? Nobody said anything about a pop quiz. Everyone was grumbling, tugging at their sweat-soaked collars. An unscheduled drill wasn't rare, but doing it now, in this heat, and outside, was clearly a sign that something was messed up. Everyone instinctively knew who was at the heart of this craziness. At 1,730 hours, the 1st Special Operations Training Company was lined up on the main training field. The burning hot asphalt reflected the sun, shimmering with heat. Every single face was a mask of resentment. Everyone could feel in their gut that this wasn't going to be some light check on discipline. This was a show. A nasty little play designed to break a single female officer. First Lieutenant Riley stood in the middle of the front rank, staring straight ahead at Master Sergeant Ryan and the rest of the command staff. The unrelenting sun beat down on her, making the sweat run from beneath her helmet visor like tiny diamonds. Her skin was burning, but the 210 pairs of eyes boring into her back felt way hotter than the heat. In that intense vortex of anger, curiosity, and resentment, Riley stood perfectly still, focusing only on the horizon. Ryan started to walk slowly. The sound of his boots echoed unnaturally on the silent field. He walked down the line, staring at each man with contempt. His nitpicking was petty as hell. Your bootlaces are sloppy, private. Your name tag is crooked, specialist. A break in discipline is a break in the mind. The small, irritating criticisms only ramped up the tension. But everyone knew it was just the opening act. The real show was coming. Finally, Ryan's feet stopped right in front of Riley. He stood there for much longer than he had for anyone else. His eyes, hidden behind sunglasses, slowly and deliberately raked over her from head to toe, like a predator sizing up its prey. It was a challenge, a staring match, but Riley didn't blink once. First Lieutenant Ashley Riley, his voice cut through the silence, quiet but sharp as a knife blade. You've been here a week, and you've certainly been making a name for yourself, haven't you? I am simply executing my duties, Master Sergeant. Ryan's mouth twisted at her calm reply. It was a shape too cold to be called a smile. Let's see how well you truly understand this discipline you preach. I could see the cold light in his eyes, even behind the dark lenses. He took one step closer and spoke clearly, loud enough for every man to hear. Step forward. Riley obeyed instantly, without a hint of hesitation or wasted motion. Her perfect military bearing only seemed to enrage Ryan more. He slowly circled her, announcing his next move clearly, like a public executioner. The other day, you ignored my direct order. I am now giving it again, here and now. Ryan stood in front of her again, looking her straight in the eye as he delivered the punchline. Take off your battle dress uniform blouse. You will demonstrate the proper field uniform protocol to everyone here. Silence. Complete and utter silence, where you couldn't even hear a bird chirp. A collective gasp spread through the ranks. This wasn't harassment anymore, this was public shame, a gross violation. Even First Sergeant Cullen's usual cynical smirk was gone, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. A single line of sweat tracked down Ash's back. It wasn't from the heat, it was from a searing anger that ran bone deep. This wasn't a uniform check. It wasn't training. It was a nasty, petty spectacle meant only to break her spirit. But Ash had no intention of giving him the satisfaction. Slowly, her fingers went to the top button of her combat shirt. They didn't shake. Facing this ritual of degradation, her mind was cold and calm, like ice. She was waiting to see who would have the last laugh in this theater. Ryan's voice echoed like a death sentence. The hot wind stopped, and a heavy, suffocating silence settled, as if time itself had frozen. None of the 210 men moved. Their stares had lost their mockery and curiosity, now just fixed on First Lieutenant Riley. Was this insane order the discipline the organization believed in, or was it just one man's twisted abuse of power? They held their breath, waiting for the answer. Ash took a slow breath. Her lungs filled with the smell of hot asphalt, dry dirt, and raw malice. She knew the score: resist, and be charged with insubordination. Comply, and have her dignity stripped away in front of a mob. Either path led to hell. But her mind was made up. This was a battle, one without weapons or gunpowder, but a fierce fight for her honor. And on this battlefield, she was not going to kneel. Her finger deliberately touched the top button of her uniform. The contact was cold and steady, just as it would be on a rifle's trigger. The first button popped open with a tiny click. In the deafening silence of the field, the sound was loud as a thunderclap. An inaudible murmur went through the troops. No way. She's actually doing it. Sarge's face went white, his mouth hanging slightly open. He didn't like Riley, but what was unfolding was a vicious, cowardly abuse of authority far removed from the strength he respected. Ash reached for the second button, and her father's words echoed in her mind: true strength isn't about never getting knocked down, Ash. It's about getting up stronger every time you are. Yes, Dad. I won't break. The third and fourth buttons came undone, exposing her chest. The humiliation was intense. The burning stares hurt more than the sun on her skin. But she wiped every trace of emotion from her face. It was a perfect mask, no anger, no fear, nothing. She was just a perfect soldier, obeying an order. The whispers grew louder, spreading like a ripple. Man, are you kidding me? The Master Sergeant is going way too far. I can't watch this. The men's eyes slowly shifted from Riley to Ryan. The look in their eyes was no longer one of awe, but of contempt and distrust. Ryan hadn't realized that in his spectacle of showing power, he was actually losing his authority. The final button was released. Ash slowly pulled the uniform top off her shoulders. With the precision of a ritual, she folded it neatly and placed it over her arm. There was no theatrical pity, just clean, refined movement. In just an OD green t-shirt, Riley stood exposed under the scorching sun. The thin, sweat-damp fabric clung to her body, clearly showing the lean, sculpted lines of her body, a testament to her brutal training. A thin waist, and the strong, yet flexible, curve of her shoulders. But her posture dominated her feminine shape. Her back was straight, her chin tucked, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance. She was no longer a man or a woman. She was just a warrior with an unbreakable will. A look of cold, twisted satisfaction crossed Ryan's face. He'd expected Riley to show anger or shame. But the scene before him completely defeated his expectation. She had given him nothing, no fear, no rage, no weakness for his malice to cling to. Ryan opened his mouth to push her further. Very well. Next is the... But his words froze. His eyes were fixed on her right shoulder. Peeking out from under the short sleeve of her t-shirt was something dark on her tanned skin, part of a complex pattern of black ink. It was not some cheap fashion tattoo. It was a single mark, sharp, strong, and somehow powerfully ominous. In that instant, the air on the training field changed again. The OD green t-shirt was all that was left on her shoulders as Riley's top slid down. And there it was, a black raven with spread wings was visible from her right shoulder. Everything froze. Under the scorching California sun, the black raven peeking out from Riley's shoulder wasn't just a tattoo. It was a massive bird, wings fully extended, clutching 3 spears in its sharp talons. The image radiated an overwhelming sense of primitive terror and a strange, powerful reverence all at once. The instant Master Sergeant Paul, Major, Ryan, who had been king of the hill just moments before, saw that symbol, the color drained from his face. His eyes, even behind the sunglasses, went wide with disbelief. His mouth hung open, unable to form a single word. He was completely paralyzed, like someone had cut his nerves. Wait a minute, someone from the back of the formation stammered. Isn't that the Black Crow insignia? The words hit the silent field like a bolt of lightning. The Black Crow. It was practically a legend whispered among U.S. Army soldiers. An officially non-existent, unrecorded, shadow special operations force. They were the ones who handled the deepest, dirtiest missions during national crises, operating outside all laws and regulations. They were ghosts. Their missions were never reported, and most of the time, even their casualties were never made public. The legend said only those elite operators were allowed to wear that specific crest. And here it was, standing right in front of them, tattooed onto the seemingly fragile shoulder of a female officer. A tidal wave of stunned chatter swept through the ranks. You're kidding me. A woman is a Black Crow? So that's why she's so damn good. Have we been messing with a legend? The contempt and mockery instantly melted into fear and confusion. The woman they'd mocked as a diversity hire might actually be something they weren't fit to lace the boots of. That shocking truth punched the brains out of 210 soldiers. The most stunned man was First Sergeant James Sarge Cullen, the one running the field. He'd respected Riley's skill, but he'd still refused to truly accept her. The sight before him crushed his petty pride right down to the bedrock. If that thing was real, how stupid and disrespectful had his own behavior been? A cold sweat burst out on his forehead. In the middle of the chaos, a weathered old soldier slowly moved forward from the back of the formation. It was Staff Sergeant Old Man Foster, easily over 60 years old and known as the oldest member on the base. His grandfather fought in Vietnam, and he himself had done 3 overseas deployments in the Middle East. He was one of the few who knew a real look when he saw it. Foster walked right up to Riley, ignoring the men who were too scared to get close, and stared hard at the tattoo. His face was etched with wrinkles like old bark, a roadmap of years spent outside, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a younger man. "That's it," Foster's voice crackled, full of certainty. "The helicopter gunner who pulled our asses out of that hell in Mogadishu back in '93? He had that exact bird on his shoulder." That confirmed the rumor, pulling the legend into cold, hard reality. The field was now dominated not just by shock, but by a kind of reverence, like they'd all just stumbled onto something sacred. Ryan finally snapped out of it, but his face was paper white. He ripped off his sunglasses and nervously wiped the sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. The look in his eyes wasn't the arrogance of power anymore. It was the pure terror of a man who had poked a hornet's nest. He knew the Black Crow wasn't just a bedtime story, and he knew what it meant to foolishly mess with one of them. Years ago, when he was still working at the Pentagon, he'd signed the paperwork rejecting a recruit's application to the Black Crow program. That was the last time he'd officially seen the name. Now, a woman wearing that symbol was standing right in front of him. This fact blew past his understanding, and his authority. "Stop the drill. Now!" Ryan yelled, his voice cracking. "Everybody get back to your duty stations." "Dismissed." But no one moved. Everyone was glued to the spot, wanting to see how this moment would end. Ryan yelled again, louder this time. "I said dismiss. Can't you hear me?" At the shout, the men finally began to break formation awkwardly. They were all whispering, exchanging glances, and repeatedly turning back to look at Riley as they left the field. Ash calmly put her combat shirt back on, the movement as cool and efficient as before. It was as if nothing out of the ordinary had even happened. Ryan started to walk quickly toward the command headquarters, but stopped after a few steps. He turned back to Riley, who was still standing there, and spoke in a strained voice. "First Lieutenant Riley. My office. Now." There was no anger or confusion in his eyes, only raw fear. The feeling that the kingdom he'd built was crumbling beneath his feet consumed the entire Master Sergeant. The heavy, wooden door closed, shutting out the outside commotion. The commandant's office was silent, like the bottom of the ocean. Only the slow whirring of the ceiling fan cut through the quiet. Ryan's desk, usually spotless, was slightly messed up. A pen holder was a millimeter out of place, a small detail that spoke volumes about the Major's internal panic. Ryan slumped into his chair and tapped his crossed fingers nervously on the desk. His eyes never left Riley, who stood perfectly at attention in front of him. He needed an answer. An answer about the tattoo that had shattered his understanding and his command. "Who in God's name are you?" His voice was a strained whisper, losing all its previous power. "I am First Lieutenant Ashley Riley." An officer in the U.S. Army, her answer was precise and emotionless, like a machine. Her calm demeanor only fueled Ryan's frustration. "Don't be an idiot." He slammed his fist down on the desk, right next to Riley's personnel file. Most of the entries in it were heavily blacked out. "That's some weird-ass paperwork," Ryan barked, hitting the file again. "I asked you what that insignia is." "The Black Crow. Are you one of them?" His voice echoed in the quiet office, but Riley's face didn't move. She just stared back at Ryan with eyes as deep and dark as a well. You could drop a rock in there and it wouldn't make a single ripple. Her silence wasn't a confirmation or a denial, it was a brick wall that simply said, "It's none of your damn business." "Why are you here?" Ryan muttered, almost to himself. "Who sent you? Is the Secretary of Defense testing me? Or is it someone even higher up, making me dance like a puppet?" The suspicion that he was being played by some unseen force was eating away at his gut. "I followed a valid order and was assigned to Fort Irwin," Riley said, calmly but firmly. Nothing more, nothing less. That finished Ryan. She had totally refused to fight him on his own turf. His authority, his rules, none of it meant jack shit to this woman. A huge, incomprehensible force that he couldn't touch was clearly standing behind her. That overwhelming fact hit Ryan like a truck. "Get out," he said, defeated. Keeping Riley in the room any longer was just broadcasting his own weakness. Ash simply saluted and left the room without a sound. The moment the door closed, Ryan let out a huge breath and leaned back heavily in his chair. His kingdom had begun to rot from the inside, quietly infiltrated by a single woman. As Riley walked down the hall, the atmosphere around her had totally changed. The reactions of the soldiers she passed were night and day from a few hours ago. Some saw her, instantly looked at the floor, and pressed themselves against the wall to let her pass. Others stared from a distance, mixing awe with a definite sense of fear. The old mockery and resentment were gone without a trace. The change was even clearer in the mess hall. As she got her tray and sat down, the guys at the surrounding tables got up, almost in unison, and moved to seats far away. Before, it was a deliberate snub to isolate her. Now, it was different. It was the distance kept from something sacred, or maybe something dangerous and untouchable. She was still alone, but the kind of loneliness was completely different now. When she got back to her room, the obscene graffiti that had been chalked on her door was gone, scrubbed away hastily, leaving only a faint smudge. Everyone was giving her a wide berth. Everyone was terrified of her past. But there was one man with a different kind of stare. First Sergeant Cullen appeared on the path as Ash headed to the firing range for evening practice. He didn't look away like the others. His eyes locked on hers. His gaze no longer held simple spite, but a deeper, more twisted feeling. It was the stubborn refusal of an old-school grunt to believe in legends, mixed with a furious jealousy. If the legend was real, why was some young female officer who showed up out of nowhere chosen, instead of one of the men who'd been sweating and bleeding in the field for years? They passed each other without a word. A dangerous, sharp gaze, like a knife, stabbed into Riley's back. Ryan's authority was shot, but this wasn't the end of the war. A new, more volatile enemy was quietly sharpening its teeth in the desert's dusk. A few days passed after the drama of the drill. A strange silence and fear dominated the air around First Lieutenant Riley. The taunts were gone. When the men saw her, they parted like the Red Sea. Master Sergeant Ryan stayed locked up in command headquarters, and First Sergeant Cullen, suppressing his complex feelings, only shouted training commands. A weird tension hung over Fort Irwin. Shattering that tension, a black, luxury sedan slipped through the main gate. The car looked ridiculously shiny parked among the dusty, olive-drab military vehicles. Out stepped a man in an impeccably tailored European suit. His name was David Vance. He claimed to be a freelance journalist specializing in the military, with official press credentials from public affairs. His manner was smooth, and his smile was the kind that instantly put people at ease. But his whole presence was utterly wrong for a place soaked in sweat, dirt, and gunpowder. Riley watched him from a distance, quietly cleaning her weapon in a corner of the firing range. Vance skillfully infiltrated the huddle of men on break. "Gentlemen, you all work so hard for the country. We sleep well at night knowing people like you are out here," he cooed. He handed out sodas and expertly lowered their guards with friendly small talk. When the conversation softened, he smoothly brought up his main topic. "I heard a very talented female officer was assigned here recently. Supposedly, she's so good she blows the men away in training." The soldiers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Riley's name was now the single biggest taboo on the base. But Vance didn't give up. He shot a persistent smile at First Sergeant Cullen, who was standing with his arms crossed outside the circle. "First Sergeant Cullen, you run the show here. What do you think of First Lieutenant Riley? Has she had some kind of special training we could never imagine?" Sarge frowned, sensing the hidden agenda behind Vance's polite manner. "No, sir. I just do the job I'm given," he replied gruffly. Vance wasn't discouraged. Riley kept her eyes on him, running an oil-soaked rag over the gun's action. Every part of her was screaming a warning. That man was not just a journalist. He had the smell of a predator hunting his prey. The eyes hidden beneath the smile weren't smiling at all. They were cold, glassy marbles, working only to find a weakness and drag out information. His shoes were unnaturally polished, as if he despised the dust of the base. Mixed in with the heavy smell of sweat was his own, foreign scent of expensive cologne. All of it was a huge red flag to Riley's honed instincts. That evening, as Ash walked alone down the path to her barracks, a smooth set of footsteps came up behind her. "First Lieutenant Riley, I presume?" She turned to find Vance standing there. His shadow stretched out long and strange on the ground against the sunset. "Pleased to meet you. I'm David Vance, a freelance journalist." He bowed at a perfect angle and offered a business card. His manicured fingers showed he was clearly not used to manual labor. Riley didn't take the card, she simply stared at him. "I've heard from the men that you're doing excellent work. That whole scene with the special drill the other day? It's already becoming a legend," he said, his tone gentle. But beneath the soft words was a clear hook, designed to shake her resolve. "Please direct all press inquiries through public affairs," Riley replied in a flat voice. "Of course, that's the plan. But I have a small personal interest," Vance said, pocketing the card and taking a step closer, a calculated, aggressive move to invade her personal space. "Where exactly does your strength come from? Your official record has so many gaps, it's like you're not even a real person." Riley's heart skipped a beat. This man had already dug into her background, and at a level that normal channels couldn't reach. "Excuse me, Mr. Vance," she said, deciding that further engagement was too dangerous. She turned her back and walked away. Vance didn't follow. But as she passed him, he whispered in a voice that only she could hear, "It seems a hero buried in the shadows is waiting to be dug up, Riley." The words pierced her spine like an icy blade. She stopped and slowly turned around. Vance was gone. Only his long, unsettling shadow remained stretched across the ground. He knew, or was close to knowing, about the Black Crow. The strange stability that had covered the base was shattered. An invisible enemy had quietly, yet firmly, moved into her territory. The unsettling tension, dropped like a poison by Vance, was temporarily blasted away by the intensity of the major combat simulation that kicked off a few days later. It was a 3-day exercise covering the entire expanse of Fort Irwin's huge training area, a very realistic scenario to recapture a mountain stronghold held by enemy guerrillas. First Sergeant Cullen was the nominal commander of 2nd Platoon, to which First Lieutenant Riley was assigned as his assistant. Before the exercise started, there was still a clear wall between them at the strategy meeting. "We're advancing along the western ridge and hitting the enemy's main force. That's the most solid route," Sarge stated, "a textbook perfect plan." But Riley quietly shook her head. "First Sergeant, that route is bad terrain. The enemy will definitely predict our move. It's highly likely there's a sophisticated trap waiting." She pointed to a different spot on the map. "We should instead flank through the swamp and cut off their supply line." "I've had enough of your armchair general tactics, Riley," Sarge cut her off. "The field isn't as pretty as you think. We're going to get dirty and crush the enemy head-on." The men around them nodded in agreement. They still trusted the seasoned leader they'd fought with for years more than a legend. Riley said nothing more and quietly backed down. The advance began. The dense woods smelled of damp earth and rot. Following Sarge's orders, the platoon moved carefully, but steadily forward. The further they went, the stronger Riley's sense of dread became. It was too quiet. No birds. The wind carried a faint, unnatural sound of metal scraping. Every one of Riley's senses was screaming that this was a deadly ambush waiting to happen. And her gut feeling came true in the worst way possible. The moment they saw what looked like an enemy encampment ahead, everything went sideways. A terrifying storm of live fire and blanks ripped through the air, and smoke grenades exploded. Visibility dropped to 0 in a cloud of white smoke, and the radio was just static. "It's a trap. We're surrounded." Someone screamed. The enemy hadn't been defending a base, they'd been waiting for the platoon to walk right into a cleverly disguised kill zone. Sarge's face went white. His huge miscalculation had put his platoon in a death trap. Communications were completely jammed, with no way to contact command headquarters. Panic and despair spread across the isolated soldiers' faces. Just as everyone braced for death, Riley's voice, quiet but strong as steel, cut through the confusion. "We can't wait for orders from command. I'm taking command now." Her voice carried an absolute certainty that defied argument. Sarge, his face twisted with shame, swallowed his protest. If anyone could flip this disaster, it wasn't him anymore, it was the woman standing in front of him. Riley's eyes instantly became those of a battlefield commander. "Everyone, suppressing fire. We're breaking the encirclement. That's the target." She pointed to a place that made everyone gasp, a sheer, 100-foot cliff face on the only side of the enemy's perimeter that wasn't firing heavy weapons. "Are you insane? That's a sheer drop." "They won't be watching it because it is insane," Riley snapped back instantly. "Second squad. Set up a diversion with smoke and some spare gear. The rest of you, follow me." Her orders were fast, precise, and shockingly sound. Hope returned to the eyes of the despairing soldiers. They started moving, as if suddenly snapped out of a trance by her command. As the enemy fire focused on the diversion, Riley led the charge herself, scrambling toward the cliff. Her movements were inhuman, she scaled the rock face with uncanny speed and grace, practically defying gravity. Inspired by her, the soldiers desperately climbed after her. The top of the cliff was a complete blind spot for the enemy's security net. Riley used the sound of the wind and distant bird calls to pinpoint the enemy's actual command post. Without stopping to rest, she signaled for a silent assault. The surprise attack was perfect. The enemy commander could only stare in disbelief as Riley and her men suddenly materialized behind him. When the final siren signaled the end of the drill, the soldiers of 2nd Platoon, covered in sweat and mud, stared at Riley as if they had witnessed a miracle. The awe and jealousy were gone. All that remained was pure respect and gratitude for the commander who had saved their lives and done the impossible. Sarge stood frozen. His tactics, his experience, his pride, everything had been shattered and proven worthless by the woman in front of him. Slowly, he walked up to Riley and, with every soldier watching, bowed deeply, nearly dropping to one knee. "I was wrong. I'm putting my men under your command." It wasn't just an apology. It was an oath of absolute loyalty, offered by a hardened veteran who had just thrown away all his pride. In that moment, First Lieutenant Ashley Riley became the true leader of the 1st Special Operations Training Company. The news of the miraculous comeback in the combat drill spread across the base like wildfire. Riley was no longer a mystery, she was the hero who had saved the platoon and a commander of undeniable skill who had earned the soldiers' heartfelt respect. Sarge and the men who had once opposed her were now her most devoted supporters. But there was one man who refused to accept the change, Master Sergeant Paul Major Ryan. The foundation of his authority, the trust of his soldiers, was gone, and his little kingdom was on the verge of collapse. To reclaim his lost power, he decided to launch his final, most despicable move. Early that Monday, an emergency all-hands call was issued again. The location this time wasn't the outdoor drill field, but the base's most formal location, the auditorium. The dress code wasn't combat gear, but the dress uniform, the one with the gold buttons, symbolizing an officer's honor. The soldiers were confused by the strange order. What the hell was about to happen in this sacred space? Ryan stood on the stage, his face sickly pale, his eyes holding a look that bordered on madness. His gaze shot directly across the ranks of assembled soldiers and locked onto Riley. "As you all know, we have an officer in this company with questionable provenance," Ryan's voice boomed over the microphone, reaching every corner of the room. "A dishonorable mark, a tattoo, is said to be carved onto the shoulder of this individual. Such a stain is unacceptable on the body of an American soldier." He stepped down from the stage and slowly walked toward Riley. "First Lieutenant Riley. That symbol. It's just some cheap fake you bought from a parlor, isn't it? Answer me." It was a blatant personal attack. Sarge clenched his fists in fury and started to step forward, but the soldier next to him desperately held him back. The air in the auditorium was as taut as a wire ready to snap. Riley remained silent, staring straight into Ryan's eyes. The challenge in her gaze seemed to come not from her mouth, but from the darkness in Ryan's own soul. Ryan's mouth twisted into a triumphant sneer. "Then prove it. Take off that uniform and show us whether that mark truly lives up to its legend. In front of everyone here." It was the same order, but the circumstances were different. This wasn't a muddy training field, it was the sacred auditorium, the symbol of the military's pride and honor. To be forced to strip here was to destroy a soldier's soul. Ryan's madness had peaked. He wasn't just trying to crush Riley, he was trampling on the pride of every man in the room. Riley slowly closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her gaze was filled with deep pity, a quiet resolve, as if she were watching a pathetic king's final, ridiculous act. She raised her fingers silently to the gold button of her dress jacket. "Hold on." A slow, heavy voice, impossible to ignore, rang out from the back of the auditorium. Every eye turned to the source. Standing there was the base's old warhorse, Staff Sergeant Old Man Foster. He didn't ask anyone's permission, but walked with a slow, unshakable pace toward the stage. He stood like an unmoving mountain between the raging Ryan and the silent Riley. "What do you think you're doing, Staff Sergeant?" "This is an inspection," Ryan said, barely hiding his rage. "Just a moment, Major. The insignia on First Lieutenant Riley's shoulder is absolutely not a fake." "What? What do you know about it?" "I know enough." Foster slowly began to roll up the sleeve of his own dress uniform. What was revealed was a tough, scarred arm, a roadmap of old battle wounds. He pointed to a large patch of faded burn scar tissue. "The proof is beneath this scar." He rolled the sleeve up further. The soldiers gasped. Deep beneath the scar tissue, faded but definitely there, was the exact same black raven with spread wings that was on Riley's shoulder. A second witness. The shock plunged the auditorium into complete silence. The color drained entirely from Ryan's face. He stumbled backward as if he'd seen a ghost. Foster looked at the faded raven and began to speak, his voice heavy and solemn, as if summoning memories from a distant battlefield. "I was saved by a man with this mark back in Somalia. We were hit by a surprise attack. Ammo was gone. Water was gone. We all thought we were dead. A single soldier appeared in that hell and pulled us out. He was a black crow." Foster's testimony not only completely destroyed Ryan's authority but carved an even deeper mystery into the hearts of everyone present. The incident in the auditorium put a quiet, but definitive, end to Major Paul Ryan's reign. He wasn't a commander anymore, just a pathetic man who'd made a terrible mistake. The secret file and the ghost of the past. Back in the command office, Ryan was a ghost, slumped in his chair. He could hear the soldiers yelling during training outside, the usual rhythm of the base. But it felt distant, like it belonged to another world. The order he'd built was silently collapsing. He couldn't end it like this. Worse than an end, he knew he had to understand who he'd just picked a fight with. With a trembling hand, he picked up the secure phone. The person on the other end was the high-ranking officer who had practically forced Riley's assignment onto him, Brigadier General Robert Harrison. General Harrison, Ryan said. It's Major Ryan. Major. Anything the matter? The general's voice on the line was perfectly calm, as if he knew everything. The matter? First Lieutenant Riley. Who the hell is she? That Black Crow insignia. Now Staff Sergeant Foster is testifying. My unit is nearly out of control. Ryan let loose the torrent of emotion he'd been holding back. But Harrison didn't flinch. Wasn't your own conduct what made the unit unruly, Major Ryan? The cold rebuke stung. Tell me everything about her. Otherwise, I can't fulfill my duties as commander. It was a desperate plea, his last shout of discarded pride. There was a long exhale on the other end. Very well. But once you know, you will be expected to handle it. You need courage. Moments later, a notification arrived on the secure terminal on Ryan's desk, a temporary access key from Harrison. Ryan swallowed hard and typed the code with shaking fingers. After dozens of security checks, a single digital file appeared on the screen. It had no title, just the Black Crow icon. The moment he opened the file, Ryan gasped. What unfolded was a sea of redacted documents. Operation names, locations, and dates, most of it scrubbed with black ink. But the scattered fragments he could read were staggering. Operation Storm Chaser, near Syrian border rescue of a friendly journalist. Kill ratio 130. Friendly losses, 0, Operation Desert Shadow, South Asian state destruction of an illegal facility. Insertion to extraction, 180 minutes. No trace left. Operation Critical Mass, African Civil War logistics support for peacekeepers. Single-handedly paralyzed enemy command structure. These were all deep cover operations, missions that had been buried in the shadows. And on every single one of those reports, the same codename was written, Storm Bird. A cold sweat ran down Ryan's back. The woman he had insulted and tried to humiliate was a genuine force of nature, a monster who had faced the worst of combat alone. A sense of regret dominated his mind. Finally, at the end of the file, he found one name under the heading, Key Personnel, First Lieutenant Martin Riley, Ashley's father. And his unit designation was what froze Ryan's eyes, Non-Official Special Operations Unit, Shiranui Candidate. Shiranui. It was the even more legendary, mysterious precursor to the Black Crow. Underneath, it was updated, killed in action during operations in the Gulf War. Project Frozen. The shock was like an electrical current. This was not just one person's story, it was a destiny, passed from father to daughter. At that moment, Riley stood with Foster in front of the base's memorial in a quiet corner. The setting sun painted the rows of stone markers red. The Black Crow who saved me, Foster said, his eyes distant. He was your father's running mate, Martin. They were both candidates for the Shiranui program. Riley listened silently. The father she knew was an excellent, strict, but deeply kind officer. She had no idea he had this other life. Was my father supposed to wear that raven, too? She whispered. Yes, I believe so. Martin was more than qualified. The path her father aimed for, the mission he couldn't complete. It might not be a coincidence that she was here now, wearing that same mark. She had unknowingly taken up his mantle. That realization, separate from the weight of the raven on her shoulder, pressed down with a heavy finality. Her fight had only just begun. Her father's secret past settled a new resolve in Riley's heart. Her battle was no longer just personal. She was following the path her father had set out on. The awareness gave her a steel resolve, but also deepened the shadow of her loneliness. But a different kind of alarm bell was ringing deep inside. David Vance, the so-called journalist, was stuck in her thoughts like a fish bone. What did he know, and what was he planning? The first clue was delivered from an unexpected source. In a dusty corner of the base archives, Riley was reviewing old training logs when a quiet voice spoke behind her. "Lieutenant. Do you have a moment?" She turned to see Staff Sergeant Foster standing there, his old eyes sharp. "That man, Vance. I did a little digging." Foster placed a single note on the dusty table. He had his own network, old intelligence buddies and contacts in foreign underworlds. David Vance doesn't exist as a freelance journalist. All those past articles were faked in the last few months. Riley's suspicion turned into certainty. "I still can't pin down his real identity, but," Foster flipped the note over. A single name was written there. "I tracked his money trail to this man, Colonel Yuri Akimov." "Colonel Yuri Akimov," Foster continued. "He's a former KGB intelligence officer. A notorious one, who commanded intelligence and sabotage operations against Western nations during the Cold War. He was supposedly expelled and vanished after the Soviet collapse, but he's still alive." Akimov. The name tickled something deep in Riley's memory. She thought she'd heard the name mentioned in a Black Crow briefing as a person of interest. Why would such a high-level figure be here, on this base, now? Riley asked. "Revenge, most likely," Foster's voice dropped lower. Akimov's career ended when one of his major operations was completely thwarted by Western Special Forces. The rumor is that one of the units that crushed that operation was our own unofficial Shiranui unit. Shiranui. The organization her father was set to join, the precursor to the Black Crow. All the dots were starting to connect. Akimov's goal, Riley whispered. To expose the Black Crow to the world, destroy the military's credibility, and blame Major Ryan for the chaos. The scope of the plot went far beyond her imagination. This wasn't just harassment or a power struggle, it was a vast conspiracy that could shake the core of the nation. Riley immediately decided to report the findings to Ryan. The voice that answered her knock on the command office door lacked its usual fire. Behind Riley stood Sarge and Foster. A shared crisis was forging the former enemies into a solid, single unit. Riley stood before Ryan and reported her findings concisely but in detail. Ryan's face tightened when he heard the name Colonel Yuri Akimov. He might have some knowledge of the name, too. Just as the report reached its climax, Riley's ears picked up a faint noise in the room, a high-frequency electronic hum, just above normal human hearing, mixed in with the air conditioning. It was barely perceptible, but Riley's training instantly registered the anomaly. "Major, could you please be quiet for a moment?" Riley interrupted him. Her eyes were fixed on the air vent near the ceiling. A stifling silence fell over the room. Riley slowly pointed. "Check that area." A maintenance team rushed in at Ryan's command. A soldier climbed a ladder and unscrewed the vent cover. He reached inside and felt around. His movement stopped dead. "I found something." His trembling hand pulled out a small black device, about the size of a fingertip. A cutting-edge, military-grade listening device. Its presence meant every word exchanged in this room had been leaked to the outside. The maintenance chief examined the device and reported another shocking fact. "This isn't remote-controlled. Someone has to physically come in regularly to retrieve the data." The blood drained from everyone's faces. The enemy wasn't just outside. They were inside the base. And someone with enough rank and trust to freely enter the command office was feeding the enemy information. Ryan, Riley, Sarge, and Foster looked at each other. The faces of their trusted comrades suddenly looked like strange masks. Who was the traitor? The shadow of the unseen enemy had quietly crept into their very hearts. The discovery of the listening device confirmed a cold truth: the enemy was close. Ryan's office was supposed to be the most secure place on the base. For someone to break in, plant the bug, and regularly retrieve data required a person with a high rank and deep trust. Paranoia spread through the ranks like a virus. Everyone was watching their fellow soldiers with suspicion. The once solid unity of the 1st Special Operations Training Company was cracking under the weight of mistrust. Colonel Akimov's goal was clear: to rot the organization from the inside before launching a physical attack. The unit wouldn't last much longer under these conditions. In the command office, Ryan, Riley, Sarge, and Foster were steeped in tension. Ryan's face was etched with the agony of command. Should I try to question everyone? No, that would play right into the enemy's hands and only ramp up the internal strife. Sarge clenched his fist in frustration. Riley broke the silence. Her gaze was fixed on the base blueprint spread on the desk, her eyes cold as ice. If the enemy wants information, we should give them the best information possible. The 3 men stared at her. What do you mean, Lieutenant? We set a trap, she stated, pointing to a single location on the map. A grand operation to flush out the traitor. Her eyes, sharp as a hunter's, were no longer those of an officer, they were the eyes of Stormbird, the legendary mastermind of Black Ops. Riley's plan was bold, reckless, and highly dangerous. First, they would intentionally leak false top-secret information. The rumor: all electronic data regarding Shiranui and the Black Crow was being moved to a secure off-site location for permanent storage this weekend. The perfect bait for Akimov. Second, they would make the lie look real. A specially secured transport vehicle would be brought onto the base. A heavily armed security detail would be put in place, creating the illusion that the transfer was imminent. Third, on the night the operation was set to launch, just before the transport left, Riley, the former Black Crow, would conduct a final, top-secret briefing for all platoon leaders in the main conference room of command headquarters. The enemy will assume their target is the data itself. If they raid the briefing and capture me, they think they'll get all the transfer details and a complete internal breakdown of the Black Crow, Riley explained. That's too dangerous. Ryan protested. You'd be the bait. If I'm not the bait, they won't bite, Riley countered, then turned to Sarge. And I won't be alone. Sarge instantly understood. A wicked smile played on his lips. I get it. Every platoon leader in the briefing will be part of the trap. Only the 4 people in the room knew the full truth. The platoon leaders would be told it was a highly realistic counterterrorism drill, they'd all be acting a part without knowing the true stakes. The moment the traitor leaked the info and the enemy forces stormed the conference room, Sarge's elite team, hiding outside, would launch a brutal counterattack to subdue them. It was a huge, elaborate deception built on layers of fake information and lies. The plan was set in motion immediately. The fake transfer plan was passed to a select few officers as a matter of the highest secrecy. The secured transport truck rolled onto the base. The base was now a mix of intense tension and strange excitement. The night of the operation arrived. Rain was lashing down, turning the asphalt black. In the main conference room of command headquarters, the platoon leaders had assembled, their faces tense for the drill. Riley stood at the center, guarded by a few soldiers, who were, in fact, the most skilled men Sarge had personally selected. Outside, hidden in the downpour, Sarge and his strike team waited in ambush. A primal, savage intensity radiated from them. Everything was going perfectly. All they had to do was wait for the traitor to summon the enemy. Riley closed her eyes, sharpening her senses. The rain, the wind, the distant rumble of thunder, she was listening for only one sound, the footsteps of the prey. The scheduled time for the top-secret briefing arrived. Suddenly, all the lights in command headquarters went out simultaneously. The few seconds of total darkness before the emergency power kicked in was the perfect signal for the enemy's entry. A faint smile touched Riley's lips in the darkness. They took the bait. The main conference room door slowly began to open, with a quiet, deliberate intent. Through the gap, multiple black silhouettes silently slipped into the room. The trap was sprung. The shadowy figures, equipped with night vision goggles, moved with smooth, practiced efficiency, mercenaries or special forces, highly trained. They were silently tightening the circle around the supposedly defenseless targets, preparing to eliminate everyone in the dark. But they hadn't walked into a defenseless conference room. They had walked into the center of a spiderweb. Riley's voice, quiet but sharp, ripped through the darkness. It was the trigger for the trap's execution. The next second, powerful flashbang grenades, hidden in the four corners of the room, detonated simultaneously. The blinding white light, searing to eyes adjusted to the dark, completely wiped out the invaders' vision. Gah! Screams of pain echoed as their night vision was burned out. Disoriented and blinded, their combat ability was neutralized instantly. Sarge's elite team, hidden outside, burst in like beasts emerging from the shadows. The thump of bodies, the sickening impact of flesh, and the sharp clang of metal filled the small room. It wasn't a fight, it was a total suppression. Barely a minute later, the emergency power flickered back on. All the invaders were pinned to the floor. Among them was a familiar face, the man who called himself David Vance. His arm was twisted behind his back by Sarge, and his face was contorted in pain. "You lose, Vance, or whatever your name is, you Akimov stooge," Sarge spat out. But Riley's expression held no victory. Her eyes were fixed on the blackness of the base outside the window, shrouded in rain. Her gut instinct was screaming that it wasn't over yet, that the real disaster was unfolding right now. A chilling whisper escaped her lips. "No, this is a diversion. The real target isn't here." That final thought was instantly confirmed by a dull, resounding boom in the distance. Every head snapped toward the sound. The night sky over the western side of the base, near the old archives building, was beginning to glow with an ominous orange light. "Damn it!" Ryan screamed. The Shiranui and Black Crow records. The real target wasn't Riley, and it wasn't the briefing, it was the old archives where the nation's secret history is buried. Akimov's raid on the command headquarters had been a brilliant diversion, drawing all security away from the confidential files that could never see the light of day. "Second platoon, secure the prisoners. The rest of you, follow me." Riley didn't wait for a command. She smashed through the window, jumped without hesitation from the second story onto the wet ground, and sprinted full out toward the blazing archive. The burning archive was a gaping maw of hell, shooting red flames into the night sky. The heat was scorching her skin, and smoke was stealing her breath. Firefighters were already there, but the blaze was too fierce for them to get close. "Lieutenant, it's too dangerous. There might be people inside." A soldier tried to stop her. Riley shook him off, covered her mouth with a soaked rag, climbed over a fallen beam, and plunged into the inferno. Inside was a scorching hell of heat and black smoke. Shelves were collapsing, and paper documents were flying around like ashes. Riley, relying purely on memory, pushed deeper toward the special vault. The thick, fire-resistant door of the room was already pried open. And inside, a man was standing. He was encased in a protective suit, frantically stuffing documents into a metal case. Sensing Riley's presence, he slowly turned. Two eyes burned with pure hatred behind a gas mask. "Took you long enough, Storm Bird." Riley instantly recognized the voice, the same one she had heard repeatedly in Black Crow briefings. Colonel Yuri Akimov himself. "The honor your father destroyed," Akimov hissed. "And you, the Black Crows, the stain on America. I'll burn it all and expose it to the world today." He pressed the switch on a detonator in his hand. Incendiary devices hidden throughout the vault exploded, instantly turning the room into a sea of fire. The exit was cut off. Flames warped the air between them. "This is where you, and America's false history, end." Akimov pulled a hidden military knife and lunged at her. A savage hand-to-hand fight erupted in the raging inferno. Her head swam from the heat. Oxygen deprivation made her lungs feel like they would burst. But Riley didn't fall. The memory of her father's mission, the trust of her comrades, and the duty to protect the nation's shadow history held her up. Akimov's movements were slick with experience, but Riley's were superior. Her close-quarters combat skill, honed in the extreme, was inhuman. She was a black bird dancing in the fire. After a furious exchange, a powerful kick from Riley landed square in Akimov's solar plexus. He cried out and collapsed to the floor, losing consciousness. Riley grabbed the case full of documents he'd been filling. She looked at the raging inferno. The only escape left was an old air duct high on the far wall. Clenching the heavy case and dragging the unconscious Akimov, she used her last ounce of strength to slide into the narrow vent. She didn't know how much time had passed. From a seldom-used exhaust vent behind the archive, a single, soaking wet, soot-covered shadow stumbled out into the night. It was Riley. She fell to the ground, still clutching the document case. Sarge and Foster rushed over and helped her up. "Lieutenant, are you all right?" Gasping for breath, her consciousness fading, Riley remembered Akimov's final, hate-filled words as he glared at Ryan. It all began in Berlin on that snowy day. The meaning was lost on them, but it showed that this whole confrontation was rooted in a deep, decades-old history. The next morning, Fort Irwin was eerily quiet, like the calm after a great storm. White smoke still curled faintly from the archive ruins, and the smell of burnt wood mingled with the damp air. The intense fighting and fire felt like a nightmare that had left only its trace behind. First Lieutenant Ashley Riley woke up on a simple cot in the command office's guest room. Her body was a map of burns and bruises, but her mind was strangely calm. The documents were safe. Akimov was captured. One battle was over. The door quietly opened, and Master Sergeant Paul Ryan entered. His usual aggressive posture was gone, replaced by deep fatigue and an even deeper regret. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice weak. It was a sincere apology for everything he had done. Riley accepted it without a word, and the gulf between them finally began to close. At that moment, the noisy roar of a helicopter descended upon the base. Brigadier General Robert Harrison from Army Command stepped out. He confirmed that Riley and Ryan were together, then announced grimly, "I have come to tell you the entire truth." Colonel Yuri Akimov confessed everything. The scene shifted back to the command office, but it was no longer dominated by Ryan's authority, but by the heavy truth Harrison brought. "It all began nearly 30 years ago in a snowy Berlin," Harrison started, speaking like an old storyteller. The Cold War was winding down, and a young Paul Ryan was an instructor for an elite international training program, mentoring the best officers from various NATO countries. Among them was one young man of exceptional talent, Yuri Akimov. He was a genius, Harrison recounted. In tactics, intelligence analysis, manipulation, he had no equal. And he deeply respected and admired Ryan. But the young Ryan saw a dangerous darkness lurking inside that genius, a ruthlessness that allowed him to sacrifice his own men for the mission, a twisted belief that honored only pure power, not justice or order. On the final day of training, at the snowy Berlin facility, Ryan met with Akimov privately. Akimov was certain he would receive the highest evaluation. But the assessment Ryan delivered would shatter his life. "You are too good, Yuri. But your power is a mad, uncontrollable force. Anyone who sees their comrades as mere pawns is unfit to lead. You are unfit for command." Those words crushed Akimov's pride and his respect for Ryan. The man he most admired had denied his very existence as a leader. Ryan's report sealed his fate. Akimov's guaranteed elite future was closed off. He was branded a dangerous individual and disgraced. From that day on, a hellish thirst for revenge against Paul Ryan and the military order he represented began to burn in his heart. "To Akimov, you were the unforgivable traitor," Harrison said, looking gravely at Ryan. "And First Lieutenant Riley's existence was the most loathed symbol of all, the image of the truly strong soldier you had hoped to cultivate." That's why he wanted to destroy you, and the history of the Black Crow you sought to protect. A long silence fell. Ryan stared blankly, confronting the enormous consequences of his past decision. Riley finally understood how all the pieces fit together. Her fight wasn't personal, and it wasn't an accident. The Shiranui unit her father was part of. The Black Crow unit she joined. And the 30-year feud between Ryan and Akimov. All of it was intertwined in a vast, historical current, converging on her. She was the destined catalyst to settle an old, generational debt. The realization brought a strange sense of liberation, lifting a small weight from her shoulders. The details of this incident will be completely buried, Harrison concluded. Akimov will never see the light of day again. And Major Ryan, you will take responsibility. Ryan quietly nodded, his expression strangely serene. Harrison then turned to Riley, his eyes holding an intense seriousness. First Lieutenant Riley. Your assignment at Fort Irwin ends today. But your fight is not over. In fact, this is just the beginning. He placed a thick envelope on the desk. It was an official order. Riley picked it up and read the contents. Her new assignment was to command a newly established, top-secret unit tasked with training the next generation of Black Crows. The unit's designation was written there, Hitori Unit, One Bird Unit. The path her father couldn't finish. The path she had carved with her own blood and tears. She knew a new, even heavier destiny waited far ahead. Her story was not yet over. The morning Riley left Fort Irwin was beautifully clear. The air was crisp, and the distant ridge of the Sierra Nevada was sharply defined. Riley packed her few personal items into the duffel bag in her bare room. It was the same single bag she arrived with, but the weight of its contents, and the weight of her responsibilities, was vastly different. Outside, she could hear the strong cadence of the soldiers. It wasn't the sound of apathy or pretense now, it was the focused, heartfelt sound of men who had found their purpose. The fire that night had burned away much, but from the ashes, the unit was being reborn with a new vitality. She glanced at the photo on the desk, her young self with her father. The path he was supposed to take. She had walked it unknowingly. But the invisible bond she had forged here supported her. She carefully tucked the photo away, silently bowed to the room once, and opened the door. Stepping outside, Riley gasped. The entire 1st Special Operations Training Company was lined up in a perfect formation, waiting for her. Their faces, though smeared with dirt and sweat, were full of focus and unshakable confidence. First Sergeant James Cullen stood like a statue at the front. There was no hostility or jealousy in his eyes now, only absolute trust and the burning respect of a devoted subordinate sending off his commander. Attention! His voice cracked through the morning air. The 210 soldiers moved in perfect unison. A single, crisp thwack of an arm against a cap was heard as a perfect salute was rendered to Riley. It wasn't an obligatory salute, it was a heartfelt gesture of loyalty and thanks from men who had chosen her. Riley slowly scanned their faces. These were the men who had once rejected her, but now they were invaluable comrades fighting for the same ideal. "Carry on," she said softly. Sarge took a step forward. "Lieutenant taught us what true strength is. It's not about winning a fistfight. It's about trusting your team, facing your own weaknesses, and above all, having the courage to stand up for what you protect. We swear here that the flame you lit in this place will never go out." Riley simply nodded. Words were no longer necessary. Their eyes said it all. Then, her gaze caught a lone figure standing far behind the formation, Master Sergeant Paul Ryan. He was standing there, silently, alone. The Master Sergeant's rank patch was gone from his shoulder. He had resigned, taking full responsibility. He was no longer a commander, just a private citizen. Riley walked past the ranks of soldiers, slowly approaching Ryan. There were no words between them, only the quiet understanding of shared memory and unspoken emotion, the humiliating order, the frozen stares, the joint fight in the fire, and the revealed history. Finally, Ryan moved. He looked her directly in the eye and delivered a deep, heartfelt salute, the most sincere he had ever given, full of apology, gratitude, and the highest respect for the one who would carry the future. Riley returned a perfect salute. In that moment, the last vestiges of bitterness in her heart faded like the morning mist. The pain of the past was transformed into a quiet acceptance of the future. As the transport vehicle pulled away, she saw Ryan in the rearview mirror, holding his salute until her car was out of sight. Riley gently placed a hand on her right shoulder. The raven engraved there now felt warm. It was no longer a symbol of loneliness or pain, but a proud oath, a legacy from her father, a bond with her comrades, and a promise for the future she would build. Years later, at an unmarked training facility in a remote mountain range, a strict but caring voice echoed through the training grounds. Don't hesitate. The enemy feeds on your uncertainty. Standing there, wearing the patch of a captain, was Ashley Riley. Around her, a new generation of Black Crow candidates, the Hit-Ori unit, went through grueling training. Foster and Sarge, who had returned to active duty at her request, watched them proudly. Riley's back was no longer that of a lone warrior. It was the back of a leader, nurturing the future and guiding those who would carry the shadow. She looked up at the vast blue sky where a single raven circled gracefully, a reflection of her own soul. To walk in the shadow, to carry the shadow, and to protect the light from the shadow. The battle of Captain Ashley Riley and the Hit-Ori unit had just begun.